how must I put it? It is ever present in our society, and we cannot afford to shove it on the rug. It must be addressed, and it requires that all institutions within the society confront this scourge on societies and on countries. And it has to do with gender-based violence. Violence of any kind is not to be accepted. It is not to be tolerated. It is to be eradicated as much as possible, whether it is gender, whether it is race, whether it is nationalism, whatever case it is, violence on any grounds cannot be justified. But today, our focus will be the church and the church's role and the church's involvement in helping with gender-based violence. Today I have with me two pastors, and I will ask them to introduce themselves. I have on my left, I have Reverend Pastor Mark Christmas, and on my right, I have Reverend Pastor Stanton Adams. I will start with Reverend Adams.
Pleasant good afternoon, and it is my pleasure and delight as usual to address this matter and to have received the invitation from the Gender Affairs Department, Ministry. I am the coordinator of the work of the Seventh Adventist Church on the island here of St. Kitts, and I pastor 3 congregations in addition to coordinating the work on the island. And basically that's it. I am a family man. I have some adult children, 4 of them, young adults, and family life education, public education in relation to these issues is really up my street.
Well, thank you very much for accepting the invitation and for being here. Reverend Christmas?
All right, good afternoon to the listeners and viewers. My name is Reverend Mark Christmas. I am the superintendent of the Methodist churches here in St. Kitts, some 11 of them, and I have direct pastoral charge of 3. Like Pastor Stanton, I would be like him, a coordinator, so that's we just call it superintendent of the churches, which includes also a school, and so we have oversight of a school as well. I look forward to the discussion as we look at gender-based violence.
Right, and so thank you very much, Father Reverend Christmas, and thank you very much for accepting the invitation and being here. Now, every year, the United Nations, in particular, UN Women, they have what you call 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. It is an international campaign that kicks off on November 25th. And that very same day is the day when it is celebrated, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And it goes up until the 10th of December. So there are 2 more days remaining. It ends on the 10th of December, and that day is Human Rights Day. Human Rights Day. It was started really by activists at a Women's Leadership Institute in 1991, and it continues to be coordinated each year by the Center for Women's Global Leadership. It is really an organizing strategy by individuals and organizations around the world to call for the prevention and elimination of violence against women and girls. It is also part of the overall Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, that pledges really to end all forms of violence, and especially violence against women and girls. Now, while we speak about women, we take into consideration that gender is not only about women, it's also about men, but more so, women are the ones who are abused. But sometimes men are abused as well, and men suffer gender-based violence as well.
True.
Now, let me start with you, Pastor Adams. Of course, we know that women make up a large, or women make up a substantial portion of our church communities. I think that is a fair statement.
Yes.
More so than men. And sometimes women are not always treated in the church with the respect that they should be treated with. One of the reasons being is because there are some notions that a man is dominant, that he's the head of the household, that he's more powerful than women. And some of these things basically feed into the domination, the subjugation, and I dare say some of the violence that we are seeing towards women because of the attitudes, the perspectives that men can have of seeing women as less than. I start there, and I would like to get your input on that.
And you are very, very correct. In fact, well, you asked the question now because I would have had that as part of the solution. We have to correct the toxic theology. That's what I call it. A toxic theology of how women are perceived by the church. And that in itself has led to the proliferation of intimate partner violence against women and girls. Because you see, just last week we were having a program on men's health, and we were talking to the issue of men's emotional health as well. And the presenter was right on point as he addressed the issue, and I even borrowed that term from him. We have developed a toxic masculinity. Society has developed a toxic masculinity, and the church could play a role, or could have been responsible in some degree for allowing this to be, right, by what we say. Because you see, there's a misinterpretation and a misquoting of scripture from the pulpit. And you know the church has a captive audience, and people are most likely to believe what their spiritual leaders say. And so I think, yes, that you have raised that we have to correct, and I could call some of the references in scripture that that people will use, even in the Christian community, because let us understand that the church itself, as a faith community, has not escaped intimate partner violence. I deal with this all the time, right, in my over 30 years of ministry, and so I know. So the church, we could no longer play the, we'll say the proverbial ostrich and bury our head in the sand and pretend that we don't have that issue. The church has those issues to contend with. Pastoral staff know that they have to deal with parishioners with these issues. And so part of the role of the church should be to educate its membership and to correct the toxic theology if and when we see or hear it. And for example, women should learn keeping silence. What does that mean? Your desire shall be toward thy husband, and he shall rule over thee, Genesis chapter 3. What does that rule mean? Let women keep silence in church, turn the other cheek. The husband is the head of the wife. But we stop there. The text didn't stop there. It says, as Christ is head of the church, right? So the misquoting and the misinterpretation of scripture has helped us to develop a toxic theology that has caused people to remain in abusive relationships in the faith community and elsewhere. And I think that the church is positioned in such a way that the church can offer this re-education that is so badly needed. Because like I said, we already have a captive audience. The church has, I guess, a linkage to its community that it serves. And so I think the church has that type of influence, I think, more than anybody else. And if the church doesn't take that on as a sole community itself, we can partner like we are doing with gender affairs, like we can collaborate. Denominations, we have to take off our denominational guard, who is Adventist and who is Baptist and who is Anglican. All of us have to come together to talk to this thing, right? And we can share our resources. I could invite Pastor Christmas to come to my thing if he has that skill and information. He can invite me to go to his, because we have a captive audience. We just want the education to go out there, and we want to correct these misinterpretations and misconceptions that people will have.
Yes, and you're so correct, Pastor Adams, in that it requires an approach, a communal approach. It requires an interfaith approach, interdenominational, if we want to call it, all of society.
Right.
It's an all of society approach, an ecumenical approach to addressing this serious social ill.
Matter of fact, the gender affairs, I don't remember her name, CARICOM Gender Affairs Bureau, the lady who is in charge, I think this is Dr. something, Rashima, she was saying that the church has a role to play in this whole thing, you know, because the church can be very influential. And so it's called for a whole multi-sectoral approach, you know.
Yes. Reverend Christmas, you know, there are many stereotypes that must be addressed when we are looking at gender-based violence. I remember this calypso that Sparrow sang. Black up she eye, bruise up she knee, then she loves you eternally. But sometimes you have these misconceptions, and sometimes, sad to say, some women buy into them. That if he doesn't beat me, if he doesn't love me, or if he doesn't treat me, you know, and it's an issue of self-esteem, really. But one of the stereotypes of the man really being the head of the household, and Reverend Adams used the word to rule. But in our Caribbean context, what we see is not so much the man being the head of the household, but we see a lot of households really headed by women, what we call the matrifocal family unit and so on. Because in many cases, the man is not married to the woman, he sires several other children, and he may not be as responsible as a father as he really should be to those children. So how is that addressed in terms of the power relationship? Because violence is really about one person exerting their power over another.
I say it's a re-education, because you're dealing with relationships and they always have this power struggle within them. So it is to take on the words of Scripture. It is not for us to lord things over, but is to recognize that we have power shared with one another. When a person begins to lord power over the other person, then it means that their frameworks are out of whack. And if we go back to Genesis, many persons don't realize that there are actually two accounts of creation. And so we only harp on one. So we only take the second account, where it says a man was made and then a woman. We don't take in the context the first one, which says he made them male and female. And so we don't see the woman as being made in the image of God. Instead, we see her made in the image of man. And once we see a hierarchy, God, man, woman, rather than God, man, woman, then you end up in all kinds of problems. And so I think that's where many persons take their frame from, theological frame, and so you end up in all kinds of problems. Domination rather than rule, dominion, which is simply to shepherd the person. That's what rule is, right?
And there are philosophies that what happens in the house, what happens in the bedroom, whether it is sexual violence, stays there in the bedroom. The church has no business intruding into my family life. The church has no business intruding into my intimate relationships. And there's even this thinking that, look, you pray about it. The church is for prayer. The church is a place you go to pray. You go to the Lord in prayer. You go and you pray directly to the Lord and all this sort of a thing. And you must suffer in silence and all of that, those sorts of, you referred to it as a sort of a toxic theology. And there are these toxic mentalities that are basically out there, Reverend Christmas.
Well, not just that they don't want the church involved. I mean, society on a whole takes that approach. For you can find where persons make a complaint to the police, and the police say, man, you all sort out that. It's only when it gets to that they become involved. Because they will say that's a matter between the man and the woman that stays there. Let them sort out their matters. And so that's something that we really need to change where that is concerned. The culture of silence is detrimental when it comes to these things.
And then the reporting, of course, some people may feel ashamed to report to their pastor, or you get married, you're married in the church, and things start to break down in the marriage, and you're afraid to come forward to say, this is basically what is happening within the marriage. And because you want to give the impression that everything is rosy and everything is dandy. And so you have both come into church, of course. They come and they pray and all this sort of a thing. But it's hell to tell the priest at home, as they would say. You know, so there is this covering up. You appear in the public to be one thing, but yet what happens at home is actually something else. Because then the church is not supposed to address those messy issues. The church is a place you come and you feel good and you pray and you're in a little corner and that's it, and you go back home and you go back home to the mess. And there are these dualities that we have. The church is about feeling good, the spiritual whatever, and the church is not supposed to get involved.
Well, yeah. Well, you see, again,
misconceptions.
It has to do with the whole misconception because we talk about family wellness, and if there's anybody that is supposed to be high on family wellness, must be the church. And therefore, for example, my denomination, we have a family ministries department. We have a women's ministries department. We have a women's ministries department. The family ministries department admits that there is pain and brokenness and dysfunctionality in families because of sin, right? That's what we understand. And so when people come together in relationships, we believe that the institution itself is perfect, but those who get involved, they are not perfect. Therefore, people need help. In fact, the family is dysfunctional if it doesn't know that it has a problem and needs help. Right. And that's it, because by the very nature, intimate partner violence thrives best in this conspiracy of silence when nobody can speak to the issue or talk to somebody outside of that family context. That gives the perpetrator much more leverage to perpetuate the behavior, because by nature, by characteristics, that's how the perpetrator really is. So if you can cut off from family and friends and your congregation and your membership, your fellowship of your church, you know, that person is more. And you said quite a mouthful, and Pastor Christmas also said quite a mouthful when we consider the theology. Because by its very nature, what intimate partner violence does, it strips one of their personhood and your basic humanity. And if man is made in the image of God, both male and female, because that is what Genesis actually says, God made humankind, according to the text. Adam is plural in Hebrews, and it's male and female. And so if we look at how relationships are established following the biblical model, because I guess most of society gets its values and laws from the biblical text, we still do that, right? And then when we come over to Ephesians, we see that if a man, the analogy is shown that the man ought to treat the wife or the woman in his life, this family we're talking about, since there is about family. So the church cannot, that's why I said the church must interpret scripture as it is, right? The man ought to love his wife as his own self, as Christ loved the church. How does Christ love the church? Christ doesn't beat up on the church. Christ does not abuse the church. In fact, Christ gave his life for the church. Christ sacrificed for the church. So Paul is saying, look at the model of Christ. So we just can't say, okay, submit, wives submit. We have to read the whole passage in Ephesians chapter 5. It's a mutual submission. Right. It's not one. None should make a plea for dominant, because when you look at the Genesis account, it is never from equality. It is not anything about equality. When you read Genesis, well, not equality, inferiority. It is not a lesser than. When you look at the creation story, and particularly in Genesis, where people like to quote from, it is really from incomplete to complete. It's never about inferiority and superiority. Right. The man was alone, and then this woman was made, and then God said, now it is very good. Right.
They are equal.
It was complete, and they were equal. Right. They were equal.
They are equal.
And so,
so the church then has a tremendous role in changing that thinking.
Yes, the church.
And the church has a role in gender socialization.
Yes, definitely.
And gender sensitivity.
Yes, and the church should have a space where people can know that help is available, and should cry out to their spiritual leaders or whoever is in charge of the ministries. If you have a women's ministries, like I know the Anglican has a mothers' union. I don't know if Pastor Christmas, if you're Baptist, if your church has a women's group or
women's. Men.
So there are places that women, because we're talking gender-based, can be directed to, right? And like I said, if the church doesn't have the resources, at least they should have a resource bank to know where to point people. So if you don't have the skill within your thing to deal, because some of these things can be, some of these cases could be very, very serious.
Yes, some of the churches have counseling departments, and I do know that as pastors, that both of you would have studied pastoral counseling.
Yes.
Right.
And, you know, the pastoral approach to dealing with some things. But then sometimes, you know, the church does not get involved. Sometimes it is ignored because sometimes, I don't want to choose sides. That's one of the issues. I don't want to choose sides. I don't want to get involved, you know, and things like that, when really and truly we should be offering pastoral help to people who need it. And if we think that the individual who is being abused needs further help, then to point them in the direction where they can get that further help. Reverend Mark.
Yes, that is true. For persons to know what resources are available, but they find that some persons, you say, they suffer in silence, and some persons don't even know where to turn. So they just, as they suffer, sometimes even us as pastors, we may also lend to the same. Maybe because sometimes, you know, spouting of ideologies, albeit sometimes false, then persons think twice about approaching us, about any issues they may be facing. Sometimes it is that we may be inadequate in our training.
Yes.
And so we feel that that is above and beyond. As part of our training, it is always good to refer, because most pastors can only offer short-term counseling rather than long-term. And so it's always good to have that network where you can refer a person if you see that they're needing long-term counseling, so that they can have that resource there. So it's just to have the advocacy, the networks that we can tap into, the resources that persons can rely upon when they're going through different challenges.
Right.
And we know that the violence, gender-based violence, is broad. As one person says, it affects you from the womb to the tomb, because it's not just acts of violence. Sometimes it's the violation of basic human rights.
It is that.
It is that.
Yes, because violence is not just physical violence.
Right.
Sometimes we think of violence as
Yes.
just being physical. It is sexual, it is psychological, and it is also verbal. And one of the things that we have to say, and we do not say
Economical.
sometimes, is that yes, it is
Spiritual.
sinful. Violence is sinful.
Yes.
And the church has to say that violence is sinful.
Yes.
And
Yes.
oftentimes it is a crime as well.
Yes.
And
yes.
not only is it a sin, but and churches must not say, well, look, or pray about it, our committee is sinful, and that we are going to deal with it in a spiritual way. That is important, but at the very same time, you must deal with it where the law comes in, and people must report certain things to the relevant authorities.
Very, very critical statement.
to be addressed.
Very, very critical. Very, very critical point you're making, because you see, well, in my denominations, I am duty bound to report any act of violence against, particularly against a minor. So let's say the incident of child sexual abuse. In fact, the people who work with our youth have to sign a document, right?
That's right.
They have to sign a document, and there's the open room. So you're not supposed to be with a child in a closed place by yourself. You're supposed to be working with them 2 by 2. You're not supposed to accompany a child alone to the bathroom. We have something that we have set down, right? The church has to be very careful. And yes, if that's the case, we have to report those things, because the conspiracy of silence could be very, very dangerous and cause some serious. So I am duty bound to report anything of that nature to the law. Might be a brother, yes. And the law has to take its course, right? I think you have a child protection agency. Yeah,
That's
something
right.
like that. And so I have to tell child protection agency, I can, as a pastor, try to cover that down. No, I have to, I'm duty bound to report that. That is what my denomination says.
Yes.
Right.
And anything, Father, I keep saying Father. I don't know why I keep saying Father.
I am
It is
a
a
father. I am a father.
That's right, Father Christmas. Yes.
I have children.
Reverend Christmas, that self-esteem, the church and its teachings must inculcate in all of us that we are children of God. I am worthy of love. I am worthy of God's love, and I am worthy of the love of my fellow human being. And therefore, anything that dehumanizes me, that demoralizes me, that treats me as though I am an object less than the love that I am worthy of, is sinful.
Yes.
And part of the problem, of course, started, I think, in the Garden of Eden. The proverbial Garden of Eden, because we know that there's where the blame game started.
Right.
And so therefore it is always, you are to be blamed. It's not me. It is your problem. It is not my problem. And not really looking at this thing. And sometimes when people are abused, sometimes when people are mistreated, dehumanized, demoralized, and they come to us and they tell us, I am a victim of this, we victimize them even more. Because we do not believe them. And we blame them. And we say it is your fault. Think of women who suffer sexual violence, for example. Sometimes you hear people saying, oh, it's because of how she is dressed.
Right.
It is because of how she carries herself. What was she doing in his room?
Right.
What was she doing at this particular place?
Particular time.
At this particular time. And we find all of these things and use all of these circumstances to kind of justify why this thing would have happened. It is wrong.
Well, we can say that there is no societal nor scriptural justification for any form of abuse. There's no societal nor scriptural justification. And to the degree that abuse is tolerated, to the same degree it is perpetrated. And so if we do not understand, communicate, as you said, the value of our humanity and our personhood, because if we understand that everybody is in the image of God, regardless of who that person looks like or appears to you by way of culture or ethnicity or whatever, that person is still in the image of God, right? And the person who really wanted power and control, because that is the definition, isn't that the intimate partner violence is a pattern of coercive behavior, coercive assaultive behavior, and the chief end is to gain and maintain power and control. And who wanted power and control? So that's why you're correct to say that this thing is sinful and not just, it is satanic, because it's the Satan himself who wanted power and control. From the beginning, I would exalt myself above the stars of God. I will do this, power and control. And so to cause pain to any of God's creation is satanic, right? Because you can't love me and cause me pain at the same time. How you can say you love me and still cause me pain? And one of the things that happens, that you rightly said, and sometimes I get a little bit emotional when I deal with this thing, because I lost my sister to domestic violence, my sister that preceded me.
Okay.
You know, so how you can say you love me and cause me pain at the same time, you see? And so we have to talk. It's not a private matter, right? And Pastor Christmas says it's not a private matter, and I think that even as a church, we have to convey that message that it is not a private matter, so that people will be willing to come forward and say that they have these issues, and that we must create a safe space in that faith tradition, organization, that people can come to talk to these issues without not feeling judged or put down or less of. And I'm saying intimate partner violence does not wear a face or doesn't have status or anything like that. I could show up on Saturday morning with my shirt and tie and jacket and just abuse my family or abuse my wife or abusing her along the way while we're driving to church. True. And come and smile and think that everything is all right. And you say, you can have somebody, as I had a sociologist come to talk to us. We were training some people about the same issue, and she said, pastors, you all can have the best sermon from the throne room of heaven. But if you have a parishioner sitting there that came from an abusive relationship, got a beating before she left home this morning, she haven't heard what you said, she haven't heard the text, she haven't heard anything that you said. That person just thinking about when they get back home, what that situation would be. So it is not, and then we look at the mental health of women and girls and children. This is a complex matter when we begin to talk to it, because there are several types of situations that may result when intimate partner violence exists. And we're talking about women's health, particularly women's mental health, sexual and reproductive health, self-esteem, self-worth issues, battered wife syndrome. Why do they stay in these toxic relationships and don't get out? What could the church say or do, that would change that picture? People, when they come to that faith community, they are disappointed that the faith community does not offer the help that they are really looking for. And that is why I believe that we have to change our posture and to create some space and to talk to this issue, that at least people know that we are heightening the awareness. And I wrote on my sheet before I came out, the public education program that we should have. You see? And that we should speak, we should present sermons. I am willing to write articles to the newspaper if they give me a space free. Right?
We preach about it, from the pulpit. That preach against it. That is so important, so that people will know it is wrong. It is sinful. It is nothing to be shoved on the carpet. And also that in you coming and reporting it and seeking help, you are not violating the marriage promise.
No.
Especially if you're married.
Right.
And you mentioned something, but Reverend Adams, but is the nature of violence is that it is cyclic.
Right.
And so therefore it affects the children. The children in that home are affected by the violence that is demonstrated to them.
Yeah.
And they too can have emotional and psychological and mental problems arising from the violence in the home.
Serious things happen to them because children live and they learn. Christmas.
Right. I say this thing is a deep running thing. It's cultural, and many of our cultural norms are sanctioned, unfortunately, by the church. And so we find ourselves really having to rethink how we do theology. Because gender, from my understanding, is really a social construct. It is how you perceive a boy and a girl should be and how they should act and so on. And that translates into how you come into adulthood.
Yes.
And so if you're going to say, I'm going to raise my boy this way and my girl this way, as I say to persons, from the time that the parents know that they're expecting, they're already deciding how this person will turn out. It's a boy, they should wear blue. It's a girl, they should wear... You see, so you're already starting the gender kind of socialization where that is concerned. If the child now grows up and he's a male and he wears pink, then the question...
yes.
Question is sexuality.
Yeah.
So it's really running deep, but we also look at how the church then perpetuates. So you start with a toxic theology, if we're going to use that term, a poor theological base. And as I say, some pastors preach that. And so you find not so much, not only in terms of domestic violence, because both parties are coming from a faulty theological basis. The abused and the abuser. And so that needs to be corrected when you're dealing with both. It is also to see how it perpetuates throughout society. In the church you have the violence, not in terms of violent acts, but when you're saying women are less than, and so therefore they cannot be priests or pastors, it is a gender-based violence. What we're saying is that you're not allowing me to be what God calls me to be. And that is a faulty thinking or interpretation of Scripture, as Pastor Stanton was said. When you say the woman must keep silent, what does that mean? You see what I mean? So it's always those challenges of rethinking theology in the light of what's happening. You also see it in how society endorses and picks up those things. So as I said, because gender-based violence is from the womb to the tomb, it even starts with how persons prefer the male child over the female. And so persons now make a choice as to what they want, because you now have this prenatal selection. And so if it's not a female, then so be it. Some persons look forward to just the male, they want a boy. And so if they get 5 girls before that, their eyes are just fixed on this male. And you may find that vice versa. You have the whole thing of sexual harassment, and that's always in the media. The whole thing of, I mean, it's rampant in our society. A girl passing down the road, she has lost her name, and so she suddenly becomes sweetheart, sweetness, you call them all kind of names. That in itself is sexual harassment, and it goes into the workplace, where you may find that some persons, because they're in positions of authority, kind of come down on those who they deem less than, so they lord it over. And so you end up with these sexual favors in order to get promotions and other gifts that may come with it, up to where you have marital rape. Right? So you have those challenges, you have to spread the whole gamut of things. But one of the things that always challenges me, it is how we normalize it in our music and pop culture. I keep telling my congregations, I become appalled when the music that comes out every year has to do with women bending over.
Yes.
It is
And so the women become, the girls, the females become sex objects.
Yes. Objectification
of the female.
Yeah.
Yes. That leads to domestic violence.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. It's a sort of demoralization of the person and the human body.
Yes, that's the sexualization.
What it should be.
The sexualization of the female.
Yes,
the music
yes, and how people are viewed. They are only viewed for their bodies. They have no other worth.
Yes.
And that sort of a thing. But many women, I began by saying that, by and large, what I have seen, especially in the Caribbean, is that our churches are mostly made up in terms of the population with females.
Yes.
As always.
And women see the church as a safe place. It's a safe place for them. That even when they are suffering the terrors at home, they see the church as a safe place. That they can come, they can speak to their pastors. The other thing has to do with trust and confidentiality. Who basically can I turn to? Who can I trust in such situation to unburden myself, to speak about my pain, to seek help? Who will keep it in confidence?
Yes.
And so on. That plays a big role in terms of people coming forward. What environment do I create of trust and confidentiality within the church, and if there's a pastor, that people can feel safe to come forward to report. So I want you to deal with that, Reverend Adams. And you mentioned something, Reverend Christmas, about culture. And culture, I think, not just culture, but race and color and ethnicity, plays a big role sometimes in how things are dealt with.
Right.
In some cultures, for example, in India, look at what is happening. Rapes are not reported.
Right.
Although it is endemic, it would appear in that society. And all because it's of the structure, the patriarchal nature of such a
caste
society, the
system.
caste system, and all of that. And sometimes women may not report because they say, oh, they feel pressured to keep the problem within the home and to keep the family together.
Yeah.
And so therefore, their whole thing is that, you know, to keep the family together is more, you know, there's such pressure on them that they will not report whatever because that may be breaking up the family and that's so. And then sometimes black women have no trust, for example, in the criminal justice system. Because they do not think that they are going to get, it's fear.
Right.
And so on.
Yeah, the research pretty much bears that out. Even the research for this federation bears that out, that folks may not come forward because they think that the legal system will not think. But coming back to the confidentiality, yes, confidentiality means that if I come to my religious leader, whoever he is, I'm not going to hear that in the next sermon coming up next week.
That is correct.
Yeah,
Yes,
because
yes,
if you do that, that is not preaching, that is meddling, right?
Or there may be some pastors who encourage persons to come forward and to give what they call testimonies.
Yes.
And to speak in front of an entire church community, speak what is happening in their homes and all of that sort of a thing, which can be more detrimental than anything else.
True.
Confidentiality is a crucial factor, and that's why I said earlier that all of that is involved in the church, in the context where the church, every church must create a safe space. Now that we are dealing with this issue, we should create a safe space, meaning that there are some specific persons who people can come to talk to concerning these things, and not just anybody. I guess you have to choose very carefully who you are going to allow for people to report those, and because you don't want it become a issue of gossip, right? You really don't want that because people will. Because as soon as that happens, then nobody would want to report because, you know, this thing is all over now, and you know, the people who I trusted and told my whole story went and tell so it's now on the poll for everybody to read and see. So that it is very, very, very important to create that safe space, and that includes trust, confidentiality, you know, even making yourself vulnerable.
A support system.
Right, a support system, even making yourself vulnerable, you know, you see, and if wherever we have males in our congregations and wherever males may congregate, even in civil society, we should have something that targets men directly, you know. Do they need communication skills? Do they need conflict management resolution skills? Do they need the anger management skills? You know, because you said when we started this conversation, and we have to understand the Caribbean sociology, the context, right? You have a lot of angry males.
True.
And some of that could be as a result of the absence of the same-sex male role model. You have this, what we call, I have a colleague that used to work with me together while we did a lot of public education. He was in probation and I was in thing, and the toxic, you have this masculine pressure pot. You know, the pressure pot, that you have that all of those, what happens when they,
Right.
So there are several issues that males are carrying, and that is one of my burdens, that, and as Reverend is saying, that what do we hear? When the musicians and they come out with the thing, what they come out? They come out to demean women and for the sexualization of women. Well, it's a historical fact, because when I was going to school in Trinidad, I was playing Sparrow, Gina and Dinah, Rosita and Clementine. You can get them all for nothing. The Yankees go on and Sparrow take over now. When you understand the historical context of that song, it's in the Caribbean sociology what is there. You know, so we need more male role models who can offer that kind of a model to the younger men that are coming up. That men would understand that we can speak. I have 2 boys, you know, and 2 girls, and I don't play with them when it comes to those things. Because you ever see me treat your mother this and this away? I don't want you to relate to your sister this and this way.
You have mentioned Reverend Adams, an extremely important point. And out of that comes the question, why do men batter? Because it is learned behavior.
Learned behavior,
Yes,
most of
yes,
the time.
yes, yes.
Learned behavior.
It is learned behavior,
It
and it is taught to us through observation. And you mentioned Reverend Christmas in terms of what the culture teaches us,
Yes, yes.
what society teaches us,
Right.
and even
Yeah.
what the family unit teaches us.
Yes.
And you mentioned how you see your father
Right.
Yes.
treating your mother,
Yes.
or how you see your father treating other women.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
And so therefore, you know, the experience that you have and the reinforcement by society that this is the way that it should be.
Right.
And so therefore, society almost like it rewards you.
Right.
Yes.
And that your behavior gives you sort of a power and control.
Because society says, well, the woman or the female is the weaker sex, whatever that means. And because also coming through the years, millennia of learning, women were property. And so it is one of the reasons why persons don't try to get involved in anything that's happening, because they see it as, well, is he woman? And so it's his private, you see? So, and so in his mind, she belongs to him. And so she can be treated however he wishes, because it's his property to do whatever. I often say in my congregations, sometimes they chuckle, but it's a serious thing. When I say, thank God for Jesus. When I say thank God for Jesus, it means a lot. He did highlight a lot of things and started a revolution where that is concerned. I say it really comes back down to the challenge of rethinking how we have been socialized over time. And one of the things you mentioned is the whole thing of culture, race, and all those things acting upon the individual. You find women, though, kind of suffering or living with what one person called a double consciousness. And so for women, they may live with more than double, triple and so on. Because you find in how we address persons. For example, we may speak of a person as African American or Asian American. In Bahamas, they speak about a Haitian Bahamian. Even that in itself is a double consciousness. And when you add a woman inside there, it means then that she's not only African, she has African heritage, she's also American, and so she has American heritage, and she's also a woman. She may also be black, coming from a different society, whether it is in terms of society, in terms of economics. And so those things act upon. So the person who has a higher class standing compared to a person who has a lower class, those things act upon the individual.
Yes. Perception and how we treat people.
Yes, yes.
Yes, and why men batter is one topic. The other question is, why do women stay? Why do they stay in abusive relationships? Now, you mentioned, Reverend Adams, that sometimes you can't believe that this man is really abusing his wife, and sometimes physically. Sometimes he's a respected person,
Yes.
seen in the community,
Yes.
sometimes in the church community, in the workplace, and all of that. And when people hear that this man is beating his wife or beating his girlfriend,
Right.
you wonder, you really wonder, It's a sort of a double life, and you wonder.
It is.
You know?
It is.
But sometimes are they able to really differentiate, or they are so ingrained in that aspect of themselves in terms of what they've been taught by the culture and that sort of a thing, that they may normalize it or think it is normal, but there's nothing normal about it.
Well, that is why the public education is needed, and the psychoeducation that the church also can provide, or networking, whatever, and support groups, because people will look, hey, this is not me alone, been in this experience, and people can learn from each other in that context. But I wanted to say something when Pastor was talking to the culture, and that's what it is, and we have to understand how this thing, because what happens? You make the woman talk to you, so go home and man up yourself. What do you mean by man up yourself? Go home and man up yourself, right? I mean, you go on and take a little drinks with the fellas on the block, and you tell them, this woman, she in the house, this is so, man, what happened to you? Make the woman, you go to the police, the police might, you know, they don't, so you have to understand, in fact, I don't know here, but in my country, the police, there's a different section where intimate partner violence is reported. Those people
they have a special victims
those
unit.
officers are trained to deal with that stuff, right?
Special victims unit is called.
Right. If you go to the police, say, man, the woman does this, you make the woman do it, man, go home and deal with the woman. I mean, if a police tells you that.
Right.
So they have to be properly trained.
I'm saying they have to be properly trained. That's why I said it's a whole approach. But you have to, why do women stay, you see? And that's because the community perspective and the culture that we have. But you see, as we say theologically, we had this serious theological debate about it, because we have to understand that culture is sinful and fallen. Not everything in culture is good. There are things in culture that is good, and there are things in culture that are bad, and that are not good. So you have to...
That is correct.
Right.
And so therefore, there are some things in culture that needs to be Christianized.
Yes, and he, the Reverend, said something very important. Thank God for Jesus Christ, because that is what changes the whole thing, because in Christ there is no male nor female, Greek nor Jew, free nor bond, all are one. Right? That's the theology. We have
all
to
are one.
All are one.
All are one.
See?
Right.
So why do women stay? The community perspective, as we said it already, marriage is a private affairs, so you don't air your dirty linen, as I say in my country, in the public, so you keep it there. A woman should have a man at all costs. That's community perspective. These are the things why women stay. You know, you must keep it together, keep the family together at all costs, you know. The child needs a father, so even if the man is abusing you, you got to stay there. You need a man. You must have a man in your life to make you a woman or complete you. You're right. She needs to be taught a lesson. Women are the weaker vessel. All of these are community perspectives, you see, that people use. And sometimes the empowerment of women, the woman may not have the skill or the resources, the fear of moving, because the research is showing that maybe this guy is going to track me down and find me wherever I am. Do we have shelters? Do we have safe homes for women to go? Because the statistics is showing that when the perpetrator know that the victim is leaving, that's the time they're most likely to be seriously injured or even killed. That's the research is showing that. And even when you have restraining order and protection order, that sometimes even angers the male some more, you know. And so therefore we have to understand that if the woman doesn't have the economic resources or the means to move, where does she go? She doesn't have any skill, any learning, whatever. You see, and so there has to be a whole support network to help victims who are in these situations, and if they have to get out of some situations, do we have the resources to help them move out of those situations? And there's a way for a victim to leave a situation. There's a way that for them to leave that situation, and there's quite something that they need to go. That's a different presentation by itself.
Yeah, you know, and I'm happy that you are mentioning some of those things why women actually stay in those abusive relationships when they shouldn't stay. But some of the reasons why they stay points back to the church and scripture and church teachings that are somehow misinterpreted.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Reverend Christmas, you know, and so the victim can end up, you know, using out of self-blame and suffering, and to the abusers really rationalizations about certain things, like Ephesians 5:22, taken out of context about, you know, submission and all that sort of a thing. You know?
Yeah. One of the things, though, I noted is that in situations where you have whatever violence you have, gender-based, we while it says true that you might end up victimizing the victim again, whether it is you walk them through the legal or you blame them or they themselves already feeling that they need to be blamed, I would suggest that if it's not being done, that in helping, we help both victim and perpetrator.
Yes.
And that is important.
Very,
That is
very
extremely important.
Very important.
Because the perpetrator needs help as well.
Yeah.
Right, he's coming from a faulty theological background,
Yes.
framework, as is the victim. And so that needs to be corrected, and the victim will also need to be corrected. So it is part of saying, well, you need to take back the power that has been taken away from you, empowering the victim, and also now to get the perpetrator to see that it's not lording over. You must be able to share power. And you're not less of a person if you share power.
You are not.
No.
But sometimes we have to recall that we are speaking about gender. And while, you know, we have spoken predominantly about abuse of women, some men are also abused in relationships. And the whole culture itself as well is an obstacle and race, sometimes black men, to reporting that abuse. Because if I report it, I am seen as an anti-man. You know what that was? I'm seen as a softie.
Yeah.
I'm seen as a sissy. You know, because a man is not supposed to be abused. The man is supposed to be the abuser, if anything.
Right. As again, he says culture, faulty.
Yes. Yes.
So it needs a lot of correction. One of the things I want to throw in the mix where gender-based violence is concerned, as I said, it runs the gamut. My researchers also tell me there is, part of it has to do with the language we use. Our language is, on a large scale, masculine.
Yes.
And so when it is that the Bible writers would have decided to redo the Bible and have inclusive language, of course you end up in arms, because the King James Version is the version. Right? Anything else is deemed as less than. But that is one thing where the Bible is concerned in terms of language, so that you got to understand it is brothers and sisters. Because if you continue to insist that it must be brethren, then the women will feel that they're not included.
Our language
in the
must
church.
be inclusive.
It must be inclusive. And I note that in some languages, French or Spanish and so on, some words that don't have a female equivalent.
That is correct.
Yeah?
Right.
So that is something that we also need to look at.
Our language, yes, and the language that is basically used in the church. Of course, you know, the world of the geographical world of the Bible and all of that sort of a thing. It was a very patriarchal time. I mean, the way that, you know, but there needs to be a moral revolution. There needs to be a moral revolution to really replace the culture of violence. When we look at that moral revolution, we can look to Jesus. Because let's look at John, I think it's John 8, 1 to 11, for example. In the culture of that day, when the woman was caught in the act of adultery, and she was brought before Jesus. The punishment, of course, was that you stone her to death. But of course, something was already wrong, because she could not commit adultery all by herself. So where was the man? So there you can see that men had certain privileges. The woman was blamed. She was brought to be punished and so on. And look at how Jesus dealt with that situation.
Right.
Yes.
He did not punish her. He welcomed her. And he castigated the others who were blaming her and accusing her of this and accusing her of that. So the way Jesus dealt with women is an example, really, of how men should treat women.
Yes.
But their challenge was that they only brought one half, because the Lord did say you stone both of them.
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is what it is.
And that is the injustice.
That was the injustice.
And today, do we still see that? Sometimes we still see that in our churches. It is the woman who carries the child, and it is visible that she had a child out of wedlock. She has a big belly in front of her.
Right.
And the church looks at that and they say, oh, let us put her to the back of the church, or let us, you know, she can't participate in certain things because she had a child out of wedlock. But yet, what happens to the man?
Right.
Yeah.
You see, he has nothing to show. He has nothing to show.
Yeah.
I normally say to my congregants, if a person, well, we castigate the woman for being pregnant out of wedlock, for example, and sometimes we take communion, for example, the Eucharist. She stops, or she stopped. Not necessarily the fellow. She is stopped, or she stops herself.
Because of what she thinks.
And she stops because she thinks, or the church leads her to believe that you stop because you got pregnant.
Isn't there
Not
forgiveness?
that you were in the act already. It's just as a result of the act.
Because then it's almost as though, it's just like the woman in adultery. You are caught, so to speak.
Right.
You are caught.
So
and getting pregnant is that you are caught. You are doing it all the time, and we are doing it all the time, but the big belly says, you are caught.
Right. So, but you still, because the Eucharist, this Lord's Supper, the communion, whatever we call it, is a means of grace. Then I come. I receive, because it is grace that brought me thus far. His grace will lead me home. So when we put them out, I say backbench them, excommunicate, then I'm not sure how we're helping where that is concerned, especially if you just backbench without any kind of pastoral support.
And to let the person know as well that, you know, once they have repented and there's forgiveness and so on, because being pregnant is not a sin in itself.
It is not the unpardonable sin either.
It's neither. And the child is not a sin, and all of that sort of a thing. So, you know, you still have to help people to feel good about themselves and not really to put them down.
Yes. Yes. The one other thing I was thinking when I was
I want to go to the phone lines. You know, we have this discussion has been so interesting.
I tell you.
I like these types of discussions, but we are going to go to the phone lines and to hear if anybody has any question.
All right.
So the numbers to call are 466-2666. That's 466-2666, 662-8674, 767-4765, and the overseas number is 1-239-645-4500. We welcome your calls. Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that as a church community, we also need to be checking on the vulnerable members of our community including not just the faith community, but including the including the wider community and vulnerable. Because we're talking about women and girls, and since the topic said COVID, you know, the research globally is showing that because of all of the lockdowns and all of these things, in fact, United Nations have said that that domestic violence has soared. That's the word, it has soared.
Yes.
In some countries, 700%. All of that because people are now home in the same space. Some of these shelters and so are already overwhelmed. People cannot access certain services and several things, so you have to be locked in that space with this abusive person. And so we find that that the whole the statistics has really gone up, and this is globally. Since this pandemic, this is what, in fact, in some countries, about 700% in terms of calls to police and the agencies that deal with this stuff. So we are seeing that. So I believe that we must be checking on the vulnerable in the community during pandemic, post-pandemic, because the research has shown that intimate partner violence goes up during a crisis, when there's a crisis as this pandemic has brought. People are stressed, Alzheimer's, anxieties and all these things, and people are brought. And so you have this kind of a reaction. So we have to pay attention to the vulnerable members of our faith community and the communities, including women or girls, the elderly. And there's a group that we don't talk to quite a lot, the differently abled. These people are abused as well. And it might amaze us to the degree that these people are abused. You know, people with challenges, be it physical or whatever. So we need to pay attention to the vulnerable, those who are most vulnerable, while a pandemic or crisis exists and beyond, right? Because we have to understand what are some of the emotional, psychological, economical implications beyond COVID-19 and how this thing will impact people and their mental health and several things. You know, will somebody turn to substance? And because, you know, if a guy turns to substance because he's out of employ and the woman might still be in employ and he feels emasculated and she says something, you know, that triggers, you know, all of these issues after the economic pandemic that may follow this pandemic and how that will affect, you know, because we already have this issue with the male already, and like I said, masculine pressure pot. And so we have to talk to both groups, and find some way, regardless of, and you have to engage men differently. Men doesn't like too much of these formal things. You have to go where men are, either on the football ground or on the corner of the block where they learn at the sports bar. You have to engage men where they are, because you don't get men to come that easily. And that's the group that we have to target because we're talking about gender-based violence. And like Pastor said, that this thing is well entrenched in our culture, in society, you know, that this man has the power, you know, and he has to maintain this dominance over this woman. And you know, and this thing is perpetuated, and the boys are seeing this model, you know, and they think that, well, that's what they do, you know. Basically, it's a learned behavior, right?
Yes.
Learned behavior. But whatever we learn, we can unlearn, right?
Yes.
What is learned can be unlearned.
We have to be re-socialized. We can be re-socialized. But you mentioned, of course, one of the reasons why we are here, and that is violence, domestic violence has always been around. But it has been heightened because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The evidence bears that out. And because of the lockdowns, of course, and people, you know, not being locked down with an abuser, as you correctly said. And also the pressures of the people losing their jobs and the other things. Once ago, like, for example, the abuser may have had, he's out, and he's with the drinking and all of that sort of a thing, and the wife is very happy that he's out. But now that he has to be locked down, it creates tension, it creates conflict, and all of that. And you mentioned post-COVID-19, because even if, when we get, a better control on the virus and so on, it is no longer become what it is today, when people get back to normal and so on. The effects
Yes.
will be long-lasting. And so we have to deal with those effects. Because there are some persons who may have turned to substance abuse, alcohol. They probably would have had some divorces as well. Separation and all of that, that would have taken place. The economic toll that it has taken on society and the family. Those things the church too would have to address.
Yes.
So my question is really, what is your pastoral approach? How can the church really help with the whole issue of domestic violence? What are some of the concrete ways that the church can help? And I am not just talking about, as I mentioned before, prayer, because there are some persons who believe that, we just pray and we just pray about it and we pray about it and it will go away. And while I believe in prayer, at the very same time, God has given us persons who can assist us concretely. So prayer and action are
they go hand in hand.
Reverend Christmas, what can the church do concretely?
Well, the church is doing and will continue to do. As I say, it has to be multi-sectorial, and so we are willing to partner with the resources that are available. I always advocate that persons have to see that if you say you are Christian, then you are Christian in whatever capacity you find yourself. And so therefore you are the church in that capacity, because the pastor can be everything. So if you're working in counseling and you are part of a church, then you are part of the church there. If you are in X, then you are part of the church there. And to always use as I said, networking. So if you need to refer, then we refer, so that the church don't see itself as an all-in-all kind of thing, the savior of society. As I said, the society challenges the church challenges society. That's where we're there. We rub shoulders. The church is in society. It may not be of, but it is in. And so part of it then is to continue to have this raised consciousness as persons, this raised consciousness of this issue. And so these 16 days leading up to Human Rights Day it sheds light on this issue. Some persons may not even be thinking about it, not aware of it. So it brings some awareness to it. My research, as I was looking at before I came, we recognize that the church is part of society. And so while persons tend to say, well, the church deals with the spiritual matters and the rest of society deal with other matters, we will appreciate that if we take that approach, then we kind of form a dichotomy, as if your spiritual side is separate from your physical or your social or economic. They're all intertwined with one another, and so one affects the other. And so the church must be involved as far as possible, because, as I said, if you're going to be abusive, then it means that something is wrong theologically with you. There's something wrong with your spiritual side, and it's being shown in how you manifest your relationships. So the raised consciousness is key. And as I said in my research, I came across a book I have in my library from UWI called Gender, A Caribbean Multidisciplinary Perspective, edited by these three women, professors of UWI, Elsa Leo Riney, Barbara Bailey, and Christine Barrow. And it looks at gender across different disciplines. So the whole thing of research and development, how is it that as countries in the Caribbean develop, where do women factor in? Right? I think the Gender Affairs Department is working on some kind of policy. So that needs to be factored in. How do women factor into research and development? As a country develops, how do you bring along the vulnerable with you? We're touching on church, so that's there. Politics. And how is gender-based violence seen in politics? So they touch on that. The whole thing of law, women and law, and how the law sometimes mitigates against women. So they look at that, the whole thing of education, women in education, and the access to it over the years. They didn't touch on IT, but I included that, since it's now to the fore. Agriculture, because we've always been agriculture-based societies. How are women in agriculture played out, the role they have played over the years, and what happens going forward. I touched on language. They touched on that too, language, poetry, prose, and how that plays out. And health, women's health issues, and how all of these things and more are affected, and how, if we're not careful, they can lead to gender-based violence.
Yes, I am happy that you mention all of those various areas with respect to gender. And politics is important because it is our lawmakers that make policies and all of that. And such policies must be enforced, because there has to be, as I said, a moral revolution to replace a culture of violence. And people often say, what does the church have to do with politics? But the church should not be involved in a certain sense in partisan politics. But when it comes to politics and the behavior of politicians, especially with respect to the well-being of the people that they serve, the common good, the public good, the purpose for which they have been placed there, you know, and if corruption within the government is affecting the country and is affecting the people and their livelihood, then such corruption should be spoken about and against from the church. The church should never cower in terms of its responsibility in speaking out against corruption and all within society that is not good. And we are speaking here in terms of domestic violence in all its forms, gender-based, men and women. It is a sin. But not only is it a sin, it is a crime and a scourge, a cancer, a serious ill that needs to be addressed in our society.
Yeah,
Reverend, what can the church?
Adding to what Reverend Christmas have said there, and that you touched something about the government, the church would need to advocate for changes in policies, policy changes. The church has to advocate for those kind of things as well. If there are policies that needs to be adjusted or changed because they contribute to the perpetuation of violence against women, we have to address that.
There should be change.
Advocacy.
Yeah. We have one caller, Reverend Adams. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I, if one believes that the church is not doing enough, the church should open a door for counseling. The ministers and them is sitting down too flat. The Bible said, go out into the highways and the hedges. they sitting down. Nobody go to church now. When I was a youth, you remember William Connor? Connor used to go around the country with a speaker up on the bus and encourage people to come to the Word of God. So.
Okay. Thank you, caller. So the church is not doing enough. Sometimes when people hear the church, they think only in terms of the hierarchy. For example, the pastors and the priests and the nuns and the sisters. But the fact of the matter is that the church is the people of God. The church is the temple of the Holy Spirit. The church is basically all of us. And so therefore, it is not just the pastors. So therefore, it is the pastors and the entire faith community. They make the church. The church is not the building. And so therefore, when we say the church, and the church is not doing, then that includes you too. If you're a part of the faith community, if you're part of the church. So therefore, that's just my 2 cents.
I think I understand what the caller was saying, but I wouldn't want to say that the church has not been doing. I could ask an equal question. Has the community responded to the invitation of the church? We have done, you know, and people only want to respond and seek you out when they are in a crisis or have a difficult situation. But the church has always been open for people to come to get whatever help and services they might need. But I was making the point about policy, and I was making the point about further empowerment and education. People will need, the church can do those things, let's say, if not partner with somebody, or even if you just have the idea and you have to get the resources from wherever, people will need skills in finances and entrepreneurship if they do, because you have to manage your whatever you have, your resources very well. That's important. You have skills training activities, right? That caters to empowering the group that are vulnerable. There are some practical things that the church can do. You have the community services. We have carried out quite a lot of packages, we call care packages, both to community members and members of our faith community who are in need. And we continue to do so. In fact, on the 25th December, we will be out in the street. We're not going to have we're not coming to worship. We are taking the church on the road. And we are carrying all of these things, care packages, we are carrying food, we are carrying toys for children, and we are going to those areas that are most vulnerable, depressed areas there. So, yes, the church can do those things, but, you know, we still have to remember that, so the church can do both. We have to assess. There are some needs that you have to respond to, and then there are other things that you can do to empower. So we have the Community Services Department, and they offer skills and things in a number of areas, sewing, cooking class, nutrition, food, all these things that are part of women thing, and plus the women ministries. They will have seminars and all these things.
So education.
Yes, helping women to deal with these situations, right? So there are several things the church can do. And we can add to the list, and we can always be adding. Because
we can add, but you wanted to say something? We're out of time. Go ahead.
No, I'm just agreeing.
Right. So we're basically
I mean, there are some changes. We have come a long way, you know. As I say, but we have a long way still to go. So there is an increasing need of awareness.
Yes, and it's an ongoing issue.
It's an ongoing issue.
It's an ongoing issue, and while it is an ongoing issue, the church's role will be ongoing in terms of helping to address it. What we do want is to make people aware that it is sinful, it is wrong, it should never be, and to address some of those underlying issues that give rise to domestic violence, gender-based violence in our society. It will require, of course, gender socialization and, you know, gender sensitivity, education. It's going to require of the church the pastoral approach in reaching out and working along with other institutions within the society. The church basically cannot do it alone. The church works along with others, and in that way, it is an all of society approach, but it cannot continue the way that it is going, and we have to empower people, you mentioned, in terms of to feel good about themselves, to know that they are worthy of love, God's love, and the love of others, and so therefore they must not accept anything less than that, and to report gender-based violence when it raises its ugly head. Now, one source of healing, I would end with that, we have in our lives as Christians is prayer. And we know the church advocates for that. But of course, we say prayer and action.
Yes.
Go hand in hand.
And Psalm 55 may be an especially apt prayer for women and anyone who is abused in abusive situations. And so I would end by reciting this psalm. Listen, God, to my prayer. Do not hide from my pleading. Hear me and give answer. If an enemy had reviled me, that I could bear. If my foe had viewed me with contempt, from that I could hide. But it was you, my other self, my comrade and friend, you whose company I enjoyed, at whose side I walked in procession in the house of God. But I will call upon the Lord, and the Lord will save me. At dusk, dawn, and noon, I will grieve and complain, and my prayer will be heard. Thank you, Pastor Stanton of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and Pastor Mark Christmas of the Methodist Church. Thank you to both of you for being on Working for You. You have been listening to another edition of Working for You. Thank you very much for your company. I don't think we'll be back next week for Working for You because then the budget would start and then they're going to have the debates and so on. But the week after that, I hope to be back here. Thank you very much. I am Les Roy Williams. Take good care.
There you had it, folks, another edition of Working for You here on WINNFM 98.9. We now head back to our regular programming.